Welcome to Agents in Action. So at PurposeLab, experimentation and conversations are a key part of how we learn and innovate. Gen AI and agentic AI are transforming how financial institutions operate, innovate, and compete. But what lies beyond the hype and the buzzwords is a more nuanced story of implementation challenges, regulatory hurdles, and business transformation. Over the next 8 episodes, you will get to hear from industry leaders who are navigating this revolution firsthand. So join us for a conversation about what works, what doesn't, and how today's decisions are shaping tomorrow's financial ecosystem. So welcome to another episode of Agents in Action, where we have a conversation about agentic adoption in financial services. And today we have Kevin Kiley, the president of Airia. Kevin is a serial entrepreneur and he scaled a couple of companies, including AirWatch. I think it was acquired by VMware for $1.5 billion. It's pretty cool. He's also scaled OneTrust from $0 to $400 million in 5 years, as well as Laceworks, which was eventually acquired by Fortinet. And Kevin's also a passionate advocate of security and compliance. A warm welcome, Kevin.
I'm excited to be here, and it's been just a terrific visit already to see how much enthusiasm there is in Singapore right now for all things AI and agentic.
So let's start off with the industry perspective. Financial services institutions, they have legacy infrastructure challenges as well as regulatory challenges. From your experience in working across the industry, especially with financial services institutions, how do you see them overcoming this?
Well, it is such a dynamic time right now. The conversation a year ago was all about this very basic sort of chatbot capabilities that were revolutionary at the time. And now we've so quickly moved past those sort of things into truly talking about autonomous agents and what they can do and the impact they can drive across the business. And I think compliance is one of those areas where absolutely you're going to see massive strides being made. When there's so much data that needs to be considered, monitored, and you're looking for that needle in the haystack, it's really ideally suited for the sort of capabilities of AI to ingest all of that, be able to process at scale 24/7, and again, being able to keep up with the regulatory landscape that itself is evolving just as fast as the technology is, and sometimes even faster.
A few years ago, this was not even possible without a serious amount of investments and building a complicated SaaS infrastructure to even address these challenges. The agentic world has sort of changed all of that in a dramatic way.
And it's early days still.
Yeah.
So, I think we're going to continue to see things evolve and just make more and more impact in the way that companies are considering their compliance programs and how they really run them.
What do you think about the explainability component of that, Kevin? Because one of the things we see is it is a black box. I think when we talk about financial institutions, legacy infrastructure is something that we can't get out of. I mean, it's front and center of almost every conversation. It's a real blocker, and it causes a lot of friction, especially when you look at agentic adoption. And the disruption that it brings with it is not something that the financial institutions are ever comfortable even addressing.
Yeah. And I'll give you kind of a contrarian take here because we've recently met with a couple of banks, one in particular that the team we're working with has a new leader who's come in, and he was sort of bemoaning that he's inherited all of this tech debt and legacy systems that are really archaic and how difficult they are to work with. But the interesting angle on it is that it's going to actually give a cleaner slate for him to start over with because things are so bad. And now the technology capabilities are so far advanced, he won't have to maybe work through what would have otherwise been incremental upgrades and keep trying to, plug the holes in the dam, but rather he's going to be able to get a mandate to make a wholesale change. And AI will be incredible for this. It is really a step into the future for the way that they're going to do things.
Banks have this treasure trove of data which they're not able to leverage. What is the best way for the banks to leverage this data in the context of their regulatory issues and the friction of teams and large organizational dynamics?
Well, here again, we see, there was so much data out there that it was almost impossible to really get leverage out of it because where do you start? The capacity to process and make informed sort of pattern matches out of it was just not there. Now AI obviously opens that up for us, where we can ingest this and really look for that weak signal that might be out there and do very, very powerful things with it. Again, maintaining the traceability and the ability to show your regulators and evidence that you took the right steps and how you were processing it what was considered, how the information was acted on, and limits will all be critical to doing it. So it's the potential is there, the capacity is there. Making sure you get it right will now become even more important.
That brings up another conversation about pilots and production. We've had so many conversations about, hey, it's a fantastic pilot, really successful, but hey, we didn't go to production. What's your take on that? How do we go drive that?
There's just this real blocker that pilots don't make it into production. IDC published something recently that put the number at 88% of them fail to get into production. Basically 1 in 10 will end up delivering real value for a company, and most won't. I think you've hit on an important point. Sometimes organizations are overreaching. They're trying to do too many things and it's too broadly defined. Go try to articulate the problem and the solution in the most narrow terms possible. Really come in and try to get those small wins that are measurable, that you can take back to the business and show we did something well, and build momentum on that basis. Mm-hmm. That's what we've seen time and time again win. Mm-hmm. It's when you're trying to do too many things at once, or again, the definition just isn't clear, that no one's happy with the result of it.
Maybe 2 years ago, you'll remember the time where chatbots were everywhere.
And they weren't.
But they were everywhere. So I remember I used to say we had an ABC policy, and that's anything but a chatbot.
Yeah.
Because it just, you couldn't get to hard outcomes with just a chatbot, because you needed to have an interconnected conversation. If you wanted a real outcome, you needed to have a systematic approach to it, which was not possible with a point solution. And I wonder what you think of this, the whole time to value piece.
Really try to keep the scope and charter for these projects as narrow as possible. That's counterintuitive. Everybody wants to go for the big flashy thing that is going to be visible and drive bigger impact. I'd say the patient approach of start small and build to that is what is most consistently a factor in success for these projects. So define it again in very narrow terms, one department, one function of the business, and then build out from there. These top-down initiatives where we're trying for wholesale change, most of those aren't going anywhere. And again, lots of examples in the press and the media about that some of these organizations are now having to really scale back because they just didn't see the return that they were looking for.
How do we get this message through that a lot more is possible now than it used to be before?
The quick wins of finding that small project that you can extrapolate how it would impact the bigger organization, doing it in those terms, finding ways to build some of that confidence that the company, the organization can not only do it, but that we're getting confident and competent in creating these sort of wins, I think is really, really important. It is a new technology. And again, just being aware that the temptation to overreach and go too broad is what will slow you down.
I see.
All the cooks in the kitchen, we can get in the way of doing the 2 or 3 things that are just going to be of obvious value and will help us build credibility to do the bigger ones.
Adoption of an agentic system, it is a competitive differentiator for most of the financial services organizations. I think the utilization of it, especially from an AI or a generative AI or a chatbot, has been around customer scenarios like a contact center solution, but they haven't really sort of helped solve specific outcomes like productivity or X margin points or, something a little bit more concrete. We do have like DBS in Singapore is one of the poster children of how they do it really, really well. But they have about 1,500 to 2,000 people who sit in Changi, and they actually work on these problems. But that's not a viable option for many of the other financial institutions.
For most organizations,
yeah. So what are the sort of strategies they can adopt if they can't throw 2,000 people at a problem?
The first fallacy I see in a lot of organizations is thinking that being able to do something 10% faster is going to necessarily lead to 10% greater production. Very important for businesses as you approach these projects to think about what are the metrics you're really trying to drive. Is it more applications being processed? Is it more sales? Is it something else? But define it in terms of those KPIs that really move the needle for the business. Don't talk about time saved or productivity necessarily unless you can directly link that down to the output that you're looking for. That's where a lot of this disappointment and remorse of some of these projects. Yes, we could respond to an email faster, but does that really mean that I'm going to be processing more customer complaints or whatever the issues they're trying to solve for? Or is it just giving time back that is lost in some other form of shrinkage somewhere else? We discussed a great example this morning from a bank. The bank in question has something like 1,200 people in compliance. 5 days a week, all they're doing is reviewing transactions. And some of these documents that they have to review, the packets are big, 300 to 500 pages. If I'm one of those compliance team, the worst thing that can happen to me is to find an issue on page 281 that would prevent our bank from moving forward with this partner, this transaction, whatever it might be. I've wasted hours, maybe days getting to that point. And this is a clear toxic term that's a blocker that we could never proceed with. If we can help that person get to that right away and in seconds, identify that there are a dozen issues in this document that are killers, we've saved enormous amount of time. They are able to then repurpose that, or maybe I'm not hiring for that department in the linear way as the bank grows because we've driven so much more efficiency. But again, starting with those outcomes, knowing what it is we're trying to solve for and working back from that is the key.
The compliance teams need to do more. You need to add more capacity. So I feel like we've reached a point where the agentic systems are there to augment that decision-making for them and augment their capacity rather than have them shrink their workforce in any way. And it's phenomenal because, like you said, if you can move something from 3 days to, let's say, it takes 3 minutes for an agentic system to go through and say, go to page 200 and check line blah, I think it's phenomenal value.
It really is. And this is where, again, it becomes sort of a game changer that you can have that capability to do it and to do it so efficiently and consistently. Giving us that audit trail, I would never advocate that you want AI to be making decisions on whether or not to proceed with the loan. In fact, that might be illegal in a lot of places like Europe where you can't do it. But helping them identify and support the decision that they're going to lead to is what's critical.
I think it's the biggest game changer, if you ask me. And I don't see organizations shrinking because these are a specific competency, and you would see them sort of getting a little bit more strategic in the work that they do. Before we close, if you look at future-proofing strategies, if you were advising a CEO of a financial services institutions, knowing that the pace of change of technology and emerging technologies is so rapid, how would you help them think through the technologies they should invest in for the near term that allows them to be, strategic in the longer term, allows them that competitive differentiation?
AI and agentic workflows are going to revolutionize your business, regardless of what industry you're in, but particularly in financial services. Keeping pace with that change will be a critical responsibility. Most of these organizations have long invested in IT teams. They have substantial technology organizations that may have functions for managing software or hardware. You've now got to look at AI as this new domain that has to have the same level of management and sort of control around it. Having a centralized control plane that affords you the ability to monitor and manage what's happening across your AI estate will be a new responsibility for these CIOs and CTOs that hasn't existed before. So getting technology in place to manage the technology, I think, is really key. Again, just as you have tools to manage software updates or inventorying the laptops and securing those, you're going to need a similar sort of control plane for all of your AI. You're going to have to show that to the regulators, but you're going to have those internal controls for your own security. Beyond the security ops of AI, you're going to want to have FinOps that allow you to monitor the spending that's happening across it. Some of these tools are very, very expensive. And there may be more efficient ways to employ them. So having a lens towards the finance side of your AI will be another domain of this management sort of concern. And then, of course, swapping the models, the orchestration, the engineering behind them itself is the central. All of that factors in.
I feel like the financial institutions probably have to rethink the skilling that they need in their organization as well.
There are some technical skills that I think organizations are going to want to make sure that they have on staff, and those are going to be hard to hire for. So building out some of that resource in-house is a critical responsibility, I think, of leadership today, is making sure you're investing in the training and the resourcing to help your team get there internally, because you're probably not going to be able to hire for some of those skill sets outside the business. So it's going to be very, very difficult to do so.
Yeah, especially the domain knowledge that they would need and the deep technical knowledge that you would need. That combination is probably, it's harder to find in the market.
Yeah, the good news is the technology itself has become easier to use. I would say that's a little bit of what we try to offer is a way to democratize some of these capabilities by making it easy for individuals to build, so that you don't have to be an AI engineer or a data scientist. I can go out and use Airia to drop and drag different components together. The LLM that I want, those core business applications, pull them together in a visual workflow.
To visualize that conversation, visualize a workflow, it changes the conversation dynamically. And then at least they come to the table with a different perspective, and they start to optimize what they see rather than not even get it off the table. So I'm a big fan of the quick and easy prototypes, at least to get them to the table to sort of
Get it
talk the
started
language and get
yeah,
started.
build that
Yeah.
version 1 and continue to refine from there.
It was lovely to have you in our studio
Thank
today,
you.
Kevin. Well, thank you for joining us today. It was great to be in conversation with Kevin about agentic systems and how they can help financial institutions drive their own competitive advantage. Thank you, and see you at the next episode.